You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Kevin Schofield and Annabel Denham. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, tomorrow's Metro has the headline "Senseless Violence," reporting police condemn drive-by gun maniac's rampage at funeral. Teacher strikes make the front of tomorrow's Eye, which warns students face a return to online lessons. The Express leads with the UK's growing housing crisis. Its headline, "Countryside under siege in rush for homes." Whereas the Times looks at the NHS crisis with the headline, "2 in 3 voters think NHS offers bad service." The FT focuses its attention on a meeting tomorrow in Switzerland, where global leaders will discuss what it calls a new era of economic uncertainty and higher interest rates. Its headline states companies face billions in write-downs as Davos confronts a souring economy. "New Hope killer will not go free," reads the front of tomorrow's Mirror, which is dedicated to the mother of murdered toddler James Bulger, who has revealed one of his killers may never be freed under a planned parole overhaul. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Kevin Schofield and Annabel Denham. Welcome to you both. Let's start by having a look at the front page of the Eye. And this is the potential strike by teachers, which might ensue. Children in England and Wales face return to online lessons for the first time since lockdown, and this is under government's contingency plans. Annabel, take us into this story.
Sure, yeah. So this is on the cover of the Eye. It's the news that teaching unions are going to be announcing their ballot result today. The NEU is claiming that it's met the threshold for a strike. So, it's not just a question of what this means, of course, for teaching unions, but what it means for pupils and the knock-on effect that it's going to have on the economy as parents are potentially not able to work because they're at home supporting their kids with homeschooling. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how people respond to this. There seems to have been a lot of public sympathy for the nurses, say, going on strike. I would suggest that perhaps public support for rail workers is perhaps beginning to wane slightly, and it'll be interesting to see how much people throw their weight behind the teaching unions because of what school children went through during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the positive, of course, is that because of the pandemic, schools are able to deal with remote learning perhaps a lot better than they were prior to 2020. But on the other hand, children missed a huge amount of schooling. Many still won't have caught up. There's a real risk for the government this is going to further sour talks with other unions or encourage other unions to themselves ballot their members. I think we can see it as an escalation with many of those unions going on strike more frequently. And like I said, I think that the real concern for me, at least, is that the effects of the pandemic still linger for many school children. Tens of thousands of children have gone missing from school rolls and have yet to reappear. We know that the attainment gap widened between what children from more privileged backgrounds and children from underprivileged backgrounds during the pandemic. This could perhaps be further exacerbated by teaching strikes. So look, let's see what happens tomorrow. But I really hope that the government and the teaching unions are able to come to some sort of agreement so that children aren't stuck back at home in front of their computer screens remote learning again.
Yes, they have been particularly hard done by through the pandemic, children at school and also students at universities. But Kevin, I wonder whether you think there will be public sympathy if the teachers do decide to come out.
I think maybe initially there will be, but yeah, I think parents will remember and are still scarred a bit, I think, from the experience of home learning for months at a time during lockdown. So maybe any sympathy may well quickly vanish. That being said, I'm not entirely sure how this online learning contingency plan is going to work, because I mean, if most teachers are going to be on strike, then who's going to be given these lessons, even if they're online? So I'm not entirely sure how it will work. I mean, obviously, the whole point of industrial action is to cause disruption and make things difficult for people, in the hope that that will then bring the employers back to the table to improve the pay deal. But these things are always a bit of a gamble as far as trade unions are concerned. But we are led to believe that the National Education Union will announce tomorrow that their members have voted for strike action. They've met the required threshold, and that strike dates will then be announced. And yeah, it will cause huge disruption, because you're looking at tens of thousands of teachers either on picket lines or staying at home, which means kids not being able to be taught and having to stay at home themselves. And obviously parents then being left with either paying for extra childcare or having to work from home or take days off to look after their kids. So yeah, it is a real mess, and it's just another sign that this winter of discontent is going on.
Yes, and Annabel, it seems as if the government is sort of firefighting now to kind of mitigate any effects of any potential strike. They're planning to issue guidance tomorrow calling for vulnerable children to be allowed into class during any walkout.
Yes, that's right. And as Kevin says, it's hard to see exactly how this is going to work if teachers are themselves going on strike. How are they going to ensure that there's provision there for the more vulnerable children? And how are the children who are at home supposedly remote learning going to have any interaction with their teachers during that period? It's hard to see at the moment how this is actually going to work. Now, of course, we're not at that point yet. There will be discussions between government ministers and the teaching unions. Both sides, I imagine, will be keen to come to some sort of agreement, because both really depend on public opinion having that on their side, and that they seem not to be very forthcoming in those negotiations that may go against them. So let's see what kind of provision the schools are going to be willing to put in place, especially for those vulnerable children, but also for children who are at home trying to remote learn, and let's see how those conversations go in the future. But certainly it's just adding to that headache for the government, which, as you say, is fighting on so many fronts at the moment.
Take us to the Express, Kevin, and we read that the countryside is under siege because of a housing crisis. Yeah,
so the Express obviously has an older readership, so I think this story is certainly targeted at them. They may have concerns about Greenfield sites in their area being taken over for housing development. But the bottom line is, in this country, we don't build enough houses, and that's part of the reason why house prices are as high as they are, and why young people these days struggle to get on the housing ladder. And now the government have this target of 300,000 homes a year. They've never come anywhere close to hitting it, and they're not going to do it this year either. Rishi Sunak's come under a lot of pressure as well from Conservative MPs to drop that target, because they obviously come under pressure from their constituents who don't want housing developments near where they live. So it's an ongoing tension, really, between the need for the government to create the conditions whereby new houses can be built to meet the demand that there is out there, but it comes up against local campaign groups, as the front page of the Express is saying, who complain about these developments going on in their areas. So, it's a very difficult problem. It's one that has bedeviled governments of all political persuasions for years, and clearly it doesn't look like we're any closer to reaching a solution.
No, well, more than 400,000 homes have planning permission on Greenfield. Those saying not in my backyard, do they have a point, Annabel?
Well, I mean, you can see why this is a real dilemma for the Conservative Party. On the one hand, it has its MPs who are representing their constituents in the shires, who don't want to see 400,000 homes built on, what is presented and painted as very beautiful, bucolic greenbelt land, which actually often is sort of farming land, which is a lot less attractive than perhaps people are led to believe. And on the other hand, of course, it has younger voters who are incredibly increasingly turning away from the Conservative Party. What we're seeing is the age at which people do start to vote Conservative is rising and rising, and the Conservative Party are going to need to find ways of attracting those voters. And, you know, looking at this and its failure to liberalise planning, that really just feeds into this intergenerational conflict, this intergenerational unfairness, and the general sense of disillusionment that I think a lot of young people have with the Conservative Party at the moment, that it is at some point going to have to address. So I think this failure to reform planning, this failure to build housing, which of course was exacerbated last month by the Villiers amendment, which is leading to the government scrapping house building targets, is just going to, you know, exacerbate that further. But it's a real sort of short-term view, and I think the government is going to need to take a longer-term view if it has any hope of winning in 2024, 2025, which at the moment is looking very, very remote indeed.
Kevin, take us to the Financial Times and explain how it is that Rishi Sunak is about to hit the constitutional nuclear option.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really big story brewing, and I think it's going to come to a head this week, possibly even as soon as tomorrow. Basically, the Scottish Parliament, just before Christmas, passed a law reforming gender recognition laws, basically making it easier for trans people to change their gender. Now, under the terms of the Scotland Act, Westminster can block bills passed at Scotland from becoming law. Now, this has never happened before in almost 25 years of the Scottish Parliament's existence. Obviously, it is the nuclear option, as the Financial Times says, but all the indications are that this week the government will in fact do that. They say this bill, which is passed in Scotland, will cut across the Equality Act south of the border. So basically they say that you can't have that law because it impinges on laws in the rest of the UK, and it's going to cause a huge constitutional stooshy, as we would say in Scotland. It's going to be a huge row. The SNP are going to turn around and say, well, this is Westminster once again telling Boston, Scotland around, not letting Scotland's Parliament do what it wants, and it's going to be a huge political headache for Rishi Sunak. The other thing that makes it quite controversial as well is that this bill in Scotland, it's been quite controversial north of the border as well, including among a lot of SNP politicians. So the question is, do they support the UK government in blocking it, or do they back their leader in saying that this is an outrage and an attack on the Scottish Parliament itself? So yeah, you can see why it has all the ingredients for a pretty big constitutional row.
Yeah, just very quickly, Annabel, before we go to the break, it does seem as though the Prime Minister is up for this fight.
Well, look, I mean, it does at the moment. I'll believe it when I see it, Gillian. There's a big question, of course, as to why he's blocking it. If he's blocking it because he thinks that it will have significant impacts on the rest of the UK, then that seems entirely reasonable. And let's not forget that there's already, real complications about how the Gender Recognition Act interacts with the Equalities Act, already. And this is just really exacerbating that. I just hope they're not blocking it to find a way to try and take a stand against the SNP. Okay. But, fundamentally, the devolution system is broken. I think this is really underscoring that. Okay. But like I said, I just don't know if Rishi Sunak will go press ahead and actually block it. I'll believe it when I see it.
Annabel, we must leave it there for the moment. Annabel and Kevin, thank you very much. We're going to take a break, and coming up, we'll take a look at the Daily Telegraph, which has this headline: police empowered to act on protest turmoil. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Kevin Schofield, the political editor of Huffpost UK, and Annabel Denham, the Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Welcome back to both of you. Let's have a look at the front page of the Metro, and this is this awful drive-by shooting that we've been reporting on very close to Euston Station in London. Senseless violence is the headline, Kevin.
Yeah, and it's a pretty stark headline. It's an absolutely dreadful story. shocked the entire country, I think. And I think it just shows the worrying rise in gun crime. Obviously, we've seen recent incidents on Merseyside as well. And I think it just adds to this sense in the country that crime is actually starting to get out of control. I mean, it's a type of incident that, not so long ago, you would never expect to see on the UK streets. And for it to happen right in the centre of London on a Saturday afternoon is pretty shocking. And obviously the police are now desperately trying to find the gunman responsible for what is a horrific incident, and hopefully the public will help them in that endeavour.
Yes, and they are appealing for people to come forward, witnesses to come forward. But Annabel, made all the worse by the fact that people were attending a funeral.
Yes, that's absolutely right. They were attending a requiem mass memorial service for this mother and daughter who themselves tragically died within, I think, about 3 weeks of one another. Census really does seem to sum it up, and it's just extraordinary situation, extraordinary event. This fact that this shotgun, the choice of weapon being a shotgun, so you have this cartridge that is full of pellets that managed to injure 6 people. You have a 7-year-old girl who is in a stable but life-threatening condition. This happening, as Kevin says, in daylight, close to Euston Station. This is just not the sort of thing really that you expect to happen here in the UK. And I think it has shocked people up and down the country. It's just an awful thing to have happened.
Indeed, it is. To the Daily Telegraph, Kevin, and tell us about this change to be made to the Public Order Bill, which would give police powers to crack down on slow-walking protest.
Yeah, so this is the Public Order Bill currently going through Parliament. The government is going to introduce an amendment tomorrow, basically clarifying the law and giving the police greater powers to crack down on protests, including these slow walking protests. Now, we had quite a few of them last year. Environmental activists, Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, as part of their tactics was to walk through busy town and city centres. We saw it in the centre of London, close to Westminster. I saw one day of just walking slowly. And the police at the moment weren't sure whether the powers that they have gave them the right to intervene. It didn't, whether it was classified as serious disruption or not. So this new amendment, were it to pass, would allow them to intervene more quickly. The government certainly hopes, and bring an end to these types of protests, because there's no doubt, as indeed is the whole point of the protest, they cause massive disruption, huge frustration for motorists trying to get about their business, and the government obviously see this as a political problem as well, because ultimately people blame the government for things like this, and they want the police now to have the powers that they think are necessary in order to intervene. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly they can get this onto the statute book, and whether in fact it actually has an impact, or whether the protesters just change their tactics to try and keep one step ahead of the of law enforcement.